Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to talk about two things which happened today as a direct consequence of the far-right terror attacks and riots a month ago. The wife of a Tory councillor who famously called for asylum seekers to be burned to death on social media admitted her guilt and has been told to expect a substantial custodial sentence. But at the same time that this was going on, community and faith leaders came together in Southport for a very public show of unity on the streets before having lunch at the local synagogue. And I'd like to discuss how this show of unity will not be as powerful a force for good as it should be, because ultimately we find bad things more interesting than good. Because obviously the conviction of the violent racist is going to attract way more attention. If I built a video around that, that would get plenty of views. But I think we should not hide the fact that good people are trying to make their voices heard as well. And it's distressingly way more difficult for them to do so. You know, those who were ultimately behind the riots, those who incited the hatred in politics and the media, and those who organised the logistics of the riots and terror attacks, none of those have yet been arrested, certainly not charged, and certainly not convicted. What they're trying to do, however, is to divide our communities. And the nature of how news works means they have a lot of help in doing this. For example, where would I have to put the emphasis in order to get a video seen on anything relating to what happened today? Well, I'd do a video about the conviction of a Tory who is now going to be eating prison food for a while. It would not be building it around a small peace march in Southport, which ends up with meal in a temple. Obviously, the conviction of a Tory is going to be more interested, which is in itself slightly divisive. As we've seen from polling, the vast majority of people have got no sympathy with those being convicted and sent to prison for their part in the riots and terror attacks. In fact, there's a hefty number think the sentences should be tougher. Fat chance we're only able to impose these sentences because we're having a clear out of existing prisoners a little bit earlier than intended. But there are still some people who think the sentences are harsh, or that maybe the sentences shouldn't be as harsh for those who were taking part at a distance on social media, or maybe, they want to downplay the influence of words altogether. There are some who don't think what you say on social media should be a criminal offence at all. And how much more divisive will it be if we finally see the day when the people really behind the riots find themselves in front of a judge? Those who organised the riots, those who spent years inciting violence, who gave the rioters an excuse to continue their violent rampage. Will we even see the major players face justice at all? But if we do, if there's even an investigation, then that will also divide people and that will make it newsworthy. But at noon today, a group of community leaders walked through Southport to show the unity of their town. They then went to a synagogue for lunch. It was a powerful show of peace, especially when we consider what's happening in the Middle East right now, not just in the UK. Mind you, when I say powerful, what I suppose I mean is it should be a powerful image, but it's not, is it? Because almost no one will have seen this image. You're unlikely to have seen it in the news. I saw it on the BBC live feed. It was newsworthy enough to put on the live feed. Just not to create a whole article about, certainly not to put in the headlines. And I don't just mean on the BBC. No news outlet could be bothered with it as far as I could tell. I checked through a number of news outlets. None of them had it. In fact, when you look at what is on the front page, the big platform on every single news media outlet, whether it be the BBC, Sky News, Times, The Guardian, the Daily Mail, of course, every single news headline on every single outlet I checked out is full of things that divide us. And if that sounds like I'm having a pop at the news, actually I'm not on this occasion. They do it because they have to. It's what gets the clicks, and they need the clicks to bring in the money, and they need the money to pay for the staff that they need to keep their operation going. It's one of the few unfit for purpose elements of our media that I can't really criticise, because if they don't do it, then they don't get the results. It's basically our fault they do it. I often have to do it as well because it's how you get the views, but I'm not responsible for people's wages. I don't have to sack people if I mess up and end up getting if I'm dying on a fruitless hill, basically doing videos like this, which I go, yeah, they're not going to get as many views. I can afford to do these now and then, take the hit in order to say something I think is important. And it doesn't mean I have to say, sorry, I decided to get on my hobby horse and now you don't have a job. And that is that although it is true that there's more that unites us than divides us, people mostly only pay attention to what divides them. You know, you take the campaign to rejoin the EU, for example. It's one of the most important campaigns at the moment, in my opinion. It's a classic case of something that's going to need to unite an awful lot more people who disagree on a lot of other things. You know, you're going to have to get people together that agree on that we should join the EU again. They'll probably disagree on a lot of things if you got talking to them about other issues. You know, like the Rejoin March this year is on the 28th of this month, on the Saturday. But at last year's March, I remember walking along and periodically being bombarded with anti-Tory chants. Some of them very impolite. And I thought, well, yeah, it's understandable. You know, we only left the EU because the Tories had a midlife crisis after all. And they couldn't just buy a sports car like most people or become a YouTuber like I did. No, they had to smash the country up like a raging toddler. And yet, if we're to make progress, we need as many people to come together as possible. That means Conservatives as well. Now, we know there's some key figures within the Conservative movement we're not going to get on side. That doesn't matter. We don't need those small number of key figures. What we need is the majority of just ordinary Conservatives. Before we left the EU, I remember the Conservatives Against Brexit group. Wasn't a huge group, admittedly, but they're not really around anymore as far as I can tell anyway. There certainly wasn't any representation at the march last year or the year before. And perhaps there won't be this year. I'm certainly not expecting it. Which is disappointing because, I mean, I will always oppose them being in government because I think they're fundamentally bad at it. But that doesn't mean to say I want to make enemies of their supporters in other regards, because that basically is about a third of the population. You know, they're still our neighbours, our families, sometimes friends. Some of them are teachers, doctors, firefighters. Some of them even saved the lives of refugees with the RNLI. And some of them wish we didn't have to suffer the continued damage that Brexit is causing. And one of my markers of when we'll know that the Rejoin campaign is really on its way is when the Conservatives have to start talking frankly about Brexit. Labour maybe is an interim step, but I think the two steps are probably very close to each other. But people inside Labour already talk frankly about it. So what we really need is people inside the Conservative movement doing so. And the first sign of that surely will be Conservatives proudly on display at the Rejoin March. But why aren't they there? Maybe they think it's a lost cause within their party. Or maybe it's because they don't feel welcome. That sort of division. And why aren't the news shining a spotlight on, for example, in Southport today, Muslim leaders sharing a meal with Jewish and other community leaders in a synagogue? Because more people want to read about a hateful thug who called for the brutal murder of refugees having to admit their guilt. Because the tribal nature of politics is that you read about some win or loss for what you see as your side, and it's like a goal in football. You know, whether it be a conviction in this case or a speech at a politically charged rally. But when you see a show of unity, and that's what was happening in Southport today, it was like, we're all together on this. It's not, there was no us versus them about it. It was like, we're all together. It's like the club mascot getting a young fan to have a kick from the penalty spot at half time. You know, when the players are all having their ears chewed off by the manager. You know, it's nice and all. The crowd, oh, isn't that nice? But the crowd are here for the goals. For the pain and ecstasy of the battle against another. Because not enough people really want to hear about the things which bring us together. That's why it's stuck on, when it's in the news at all, it's on at the end. Or in the newspapers buried in the middle somewhere. It's why social media and traditional media alike have this weakness that ends up corralling people into echo chambers and giving harmful views a deadly dose of confirmation bias. It's because they all need engagement to survive and grow, and division engages, and unity doesn't. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.